am Magdalene Lessman, president of the Ajax Pickering chapter. This is really awesome. This is a long overdue and great conversation it's going to be. Today's webinar is organized by the Congress of Black Women in partnership with the Pickering, Ajax, Oshawa, and Whitby Public Libraries. Now, before we get started, Jessica Trinier of the Pickering Library will read the land acknowledgement.
So although we are in a virtual space tonight, our communities at Pickering, Ajax, Whitby, and Oshawa are situated on stolen land. We would like to acknowledge that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which the Durham region is located. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge that Durham region forms a part of the traditional and treaty territory of the Anishinaabe Mississauga, adjacent to the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, the Mississaugas people of the treaty territory of the Chippewas and Georgina Island First Nation. It is on these ancestral and treaty lands that we learn, share knowledge, and live.
Okay.
So just to go over a couple of quick things with Zoom, the event is being recorded and a copy will be made available to the email address you provided a day or two after the event. It will be posted on the Congress of Black Women of Canada's Facebook page with the Ajax, Pickering, and Oshawa Whitby chapters, as well as our library YouTube pages. It's currently being live streamed on the Congress of Black Women of Canada Ajax Pickering's Facebook page. If you're unfamiliar with Zoom, you should be able to hear the panelists and see the panelists shortly. Your camera and microphone will not be active, so we will not be able to see or hear you. If you have any technical questions, please let us know by using the chat feature. To access this feature, it should be on the bottom bar of your screen if you are using a computer, or by clicking the More menu buttons on your tablet or smart device. If you're experiencing severe technical difficulties, you can leave the webinar by clicking on the Leave button on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. It should be a little red button. Because it is being recorded and made available to you later on, you are able to rewatch anything that you have missed. So in this event, we will hear from many panelists and you'll have the opportunity to have your questions answered. Please feel free to type any questions that you have in the Q&A module. So questions will be screened by our moderators. So your question will appear to the public if it is being answered live by our panelists. You may get a notification that your question is being answered live. If there's a typed response happening or if it's dismissed, we're just going to go through, make sure we monitor them for any duplication of questions. And when you're asking a question, please indicate if the question is for a panelist or a government official. If there's a specific person you would like to direct your question to, please add their name to the question in the Q&A feature. I think that's it for me.
Okay, I'd like to tell you a little about the Congress of Black Women. It is a non-profit organization. Our mission is to improve the lives of Black women and their families by empowering them and providing various forms of support. We have actually 8 chapters. There's Ajax Pickering, there's the Brampton, London, Mississauga, North York, Oshawa, Whitby, and Scarborough. Please check our website for more information on how you can become a member. Our website is cbwcontario-ontario.com/home, and you will find a listing of the regional chapters. You can also find us at our Facebook address, and also you can find out how you can choose to become a member of Congress. So we would gladly welcome anyone who wants to become part of our team, our group. Now, what I'd like to go next to is give you an overview of how the panel discussion is going to unfold. In part 1, there will be a discussion with the panelists and by the moderator. Then part 2, the government officials, there will be questions posed by the audience. You can pose any questions, and then we could ask them to the government officials, and then that would be followed by the closing remarks. Now, today, today's webinar topic is Combating Systemic Anti-Black Racism in Education, Health, Economy, and the Criminal Justice System. We brought together highly respected community leaders with in-depth knowledge of the issues that our community faces. And they would also discuss several areas. They have expertise in the various areas, and they would also identify the issues and also recommend solutions. As part of the listening audience, we've invited our public officials who have the power to actually enact the changes required to dismantle any discriminatory practices. And also they will respond to any questions you've got at the end of this session. You, the audience, is a very important component of that whole discussion. Everyone's contribution today is a critical addition to the combating systemic anti-racism stage. Thank you. At this point, to start the conversation, I introduce our moderator, Vanessa Reed. She is the Vice President of the Oshawa Whitby chapter, and our co-moderator, Angela Todd, President of the Oshawa Whitby chapter.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. I would like to take this opportunity to say welcome to you all, and just to let you know that this is a great space that we're in right now. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our webinar panel discussion on combating the roots of anti-Black racism. We are so pleased that you took the time to join us today. So we are joined by 8 of our well-respected community leaders in their fields of expertise, and from our discussion this evening, I'm sure that we will all be further enlightened and informed on issues of systemic anti-Black racism that we as Black Canadians encounter in many ways on a daily basis. We are hoping to provide solutions on how to dismantle existing racist policies and structures, thus providing a roadmap towards building a more equitable and inclusive community for all. As Magdalene said, my name is Vanessa Reed, and I am the Vice President of the Oshawa Whitby chapter of the Congress of Black Women of Ontario. So right now, I'm going to move straight along, and I would like to take a moment. You've seen just very briefly the bios. I'm not sure if it's playing in the background because I can't see it anymore. Our panelists that we have with us today. So I am going to just read the bios. Some of them are a little bit long, so I've condensed it into what I felt was like the most important part. So we'll start with Dr. Joseph Smith. He's a PhD, ABD at York University. He's an educator and community outreach worker and project coordinator for the Black Experience Project. Joseph is also a co-founder of Generation Chosen, a nonprofit organization. He's also an anti-Black racism and emotional health facilitator and consultant at Morneau Shepell. And Joseph sits on the board of Operation Black Vote Canada as the Director of Youth Outreach. Second, I'd like to introduce Mr. Rasulan Q. Hoppy. He is the coordinating principal of secondary education in the Peel District School Board, responsible for the implementation of the Plan for Student Success 2016 to 21 and Board Improvement Plan for Student Achievement with the specific focus on grades 9 through 12. He is a newly elected vice chair of the Peel Association of Secondary School Principals and an executive advisor for Stop Anti-Black Racism, short form SABRE, the Resource and Advocacy Counseling Group. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Ms. Laurie Ann Thomas. She is president of the Canadian Association of Black Lawyers and Toronto Director of Criminal Lawyers Association. She is also the sole practitioner in her Toronto firm, Thomas Defense, practicing criminal and law society regulatory defense. She is a criminal co-instructor of the Ryerson Law Practice Program, and as such, she has appeared at every level of court. Now for Sergeant Keith Richards. Sergeant Keith is a 30-year veteran of the Durham Region Police Service. His current role is the Regional Youth Coordinator at the Durham Region Police Service, where he is the main point of contact between schools and school officers. Our next panelist is Dr. Marissa Joseph. Dr. Marissa Joseph is a pediatrician and dermatologist. She is double board certified. This gave me goosies. She's one of a handful of doctors with that distinction in Canada. Yay for Dr. Marissa. And as a pediatrician and dermatologist after completing pediatric training at the Hospital for Sick Children, followed by her dermatology residency at the University of Toronto. She completed her MSc, her Master in Science, in Community Health at the Dalla Lana School of Public Health and is full-time academic faculty at the University of Toronto. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Ms. Sophia Bishop. She is the CEO and founder of Elevated Living Academy, a personal effectiveness lifestyle company. She is also the founder of SABRE, which is Stop Anti-Black Racism Resource and Advocacy Counseling Group. Sophia is a mental health and wellness coach, leadership coach, training facilitator, and motivational speaker, and a true visionary expert at connecting through elevated leadership, personal effectiveness training workshops. Andrea Barrett is our next person that I'd like to introduce you to. She is our president and of the Canadian Black Chamber of Commerce, as well as CEO of the Diversity Agency. Together with Dr. Gail Robinson, they designed an unconscious bias and anti-Black racism training workshop program that helps corporate staff understand how to identify unconscious bias and issues faced by Black people within the workplace. Andrea is also a licensed John Maxwell coach and trainer, as well as speaker with over 15 years of experience delivering and facilitating workshops to clients globally. Our next and final panelist is Ms. Alison Hector Alexander. She is the director of the Office of Student Diversity, Inclusion, and Transitions at Durham College. She oversees the college diversity and inclusion services, the First Peoples Indigenous Center, the Ontario Access and Inclusion Program RISE, the Institute of Student Leadership, the College Sexual Violence Mandate and All Orientation and Transitions Program for new students. So you see, we have a very, very well-rounded group of individuals on our panel. So right now, I'd like to take the time to actually welcome everyone, say, we are happy that you guys took the time out to join us today, and we're very happy that you are with us. So I would like to begin by starting with some questions now that I will direct to our education, to our education field. And pardon me when you see my head, I am working from two screens. Normally, if I'm doing something, I have a podium, I'm looking at everybody, and I've got all my notes here. But now I've got to work with two screens. So you'll see the side of my face every so often. So let's get started on systemic barriers. We're working now on education. So this will be addressed to both, I'll let you know who at the time, but I think I'll probably start with Rasulan. So if you could unmute your microphone in a moment. Can you name two main barriers that Black students and parents face within your school board, and provide any examples of changes that are currently in place by administrators to address these obstacles and barriers for Black students within the school system?
Definitely. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I would say that the first of the two main barriers that people within the Peel District School Board specifically are faced with, and one thing I'm going to say as a caveat, although I'm speaking specifically from the lens of being employed within the Peel District School Board, unfortunately, the issues of anti-Black racism know no boundaries and are very applicable to Durham, Toronto, York, and across the country. But specifically within the Peel District School Board, I would say that one of the biggest challenges that are faced within the district has to do with the lack of voice. And I would say that that speaks to the fact that there are many Black families with whom have been saying what is now being given light and being given attention for many years, for many decades. And so their voice is something to which they have intentionally and deliberately been silenced, as well as the fact that they have not had the mechanisms available to them to be able to articulate their frustrations and challenges over the course of this time. And so removing those barriers, both perceived and real barriers, in terms of being able to make sure that they have voice and that they're given the agency necessary to advocate for their children, to be able to make sure that the issues that they feel are germane to the well-being, the sense of belonging, and the opportunities are there for their children. Those are the things that need to be addressed, in terms of making sure that they have the access necessary to make sure that their voices are heard. The second piece that I would say has to do with the educators themselves. And I would say, again, when you're talking about it, it has to do with the perceptions that they have of Black children, the perceptions that they have of the systemic barriers that do or don't exist in their particular mind, as well as their inability to effectively address them, again, because they either feel that they don't exist or they're not equipped and they do not know how. And so what is required is to make sure that they themselves go through a journey of recognizing that first and foremost, there is anti-Black racism, and that it is endemic within the system, within the educational system, and that they must be intentional in their efforts to address it and to be able to confront it. And so through that journey and through that process, they in turn will now be able to affect their practice, to be able to shift their pedagogy, so that way they can now start to eliminate the barriers of anti-Black racism that exist and be able to make sure that the outcomes for Black children are on par with those of their peers, so that way they have equitable outcomes for success in the future.
Wonderful. Oh my goodness. Okay, so now my next question, I'm going to address this one to Dr. Joseph. What steps do you think can be done to better incorporate Black history into the school curriculum and not just have it relegated to just the Black History Month in February?
Interesting. Well, first and foremost, thank you so much for allowing me to speak in this panel. And I'm so happy to be amongst all these distinguished guests here. But I found the question interesting because you simply have to do just that. You have to stop limiting Black history to February, the shortest month of the year, and literally infuse the curriculum mandates necessary to put it a part of every part of the history curriculum. In grade 10 history, for example, that's a mandatory course that students have to take in high school. That should be perennial throughout all of their learnings in that course, because you can guarantee then that anybody going through the education system at some point in their experience and in their educational trajectory has had to encounter Black history in its fullness and in its richness. But often it becomes a footnote to talking about Canada and its greatness and its development over the course of the last 200 years. And so you'd have to simply just do that, stop limiting it to February. And at a ministerial level, you'd have to just employ the particular components to the curriculum document itself to ensure that there is space for that. And also at the senior level, create whole courses on Black history. And that should be an option. And right now it's locally developed courses. That means it's school specific and area specific. And it should be a universal mandate for people to encounter.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that very, very poignant answer. That was great. So I'm not sure who I'm going to read the question first, and then I'm going to probably choose who to answer. There is anecdotal evidence that Black students are intimidated by the presence of police in high schools, as they are more likely to be disciplined through suspension or referred to law enforcement for minor infractions than their non-Black counterparts. This systemic racism, in turn, eventually sets some along the pipeline path from school into the justice system. Now, do you feel there's a role for having police in schools, or would the presence of, say, for instance, Black social workers and or child and youth workers, will they help to alleviate some of the stress and angst that Black students experience, which may then in turn place them on a better path towards success? So, Dr. Joseph, you answer this one first. And then, Raslan, I'm going to ask you for a second opinion.
Perfect. We can just rally. We can just rally back and forth.
Exactly.
So personally, as an adult Black professional working in a variety of spaces, corporate, governmental, educational, I myself am struggling with dealing with the hyper surveillance of my Black body. and that's from everybody. Now, when you add into that mix the particular racial traumas I've experienced through my encounters with police officers, I would not want to go back in time and have police officers in my schools, because it would only contribute to me feeling A, comfortable with being hyperly surveilled, and B, having to deal with the emotional issues as I try to ready myself to receive information in a class. And there are all sorts of ramifications from such a presence as a police officer, triggering parts of the brain, specifically the amygdala, which is overreactive in moment. It's a little peanut spot in the brain. I can't really show it to you right now. I can't open it up, but the little peanut spot in the brain, and that gets triggered, and that becomes overreactive, and then it pretty much overwhelms the prefrontal cortex, preventing someone from making a
proper decision. Okay.
Yeah.
I'd like to flip that over to you, Mr. Hoppe.
No problem. So I think that it all depends on how the police are engaging with the students, because I think that similar to society, you do have issues in which the police are present, and they are, as Dr. Smith mentioned, we are hyper surveilled. However, I do think that you have opportunities when they are structured and created properly that can facilitate conversation and therefore learning and understanding between students and the police. And I think that it really is incumbent on the administration and the teachers within that building for their setting to make sure that they are the ones who are setting that tone, so that way it is not a simple matter of police coming in to simply arrest, but more so understanding the relationship that's being developed, hopefully, so that way the nature of that relationship can be one that is positive and can hopefully counter and provide another means of being able to view the police, as opposed to one in which they are, again, triggering the amygdala with the hypersurveillance and the prefrontal cortex and not being able to focus on the lesson at hand. So I do not think that the removal of police in and of itself by itself is a solution. I think it has to do with the nature of engagement with the police and making sure that the parameters and the tone is properly set, so that way students first and foremost understand why the police are there. And then second, the adults in the building, those who are responsible, specifically those of the administration, have been able to properly set the tone to ensure that the interactions that are taking place are ones that are going to be positive. And if it turns out that a child has done something that does warrant police intervention, it is done in a manner that does not remove the dignity of that child and does not also be used as a scapegoat to be able to set the tone as an example for others in a way that is now going to create a permanent scar on all those who participate by either being directly impacted or by observing that process.
Got it. Okay. So from that, we are going to do a segue over to, I will come back to you guys, but we're going to do a segue over to Sergeant Keith. In your role of Regional Youth Coordinator with the Durham District School Board, the Durham District, Vanessa, no, the Police Force of Durham. In your role, you're in a position of influence on our young and vulnerable students, people, not just students. Can you give us a brief overview of your work with the youth? And is there a plan to liaise with schools and high school students? And again, do you also feel that there's a role for police in high schools? I know it's a three-part question, but I'll give you 2 minutes.
So the
okay.
most important part of the officer presence in the school is that they have to build a relationship with the students. When we no longer have the SRO program, School Resource Officer Program, but when we did, the idea was that when the officers were in the schools, that they had to befriend the student body, and I would be lying to say that that can be a barrier for some people. I'm talking even from the officer standpoint, because the officer is the outsider, right? You have a cohort of students that might have a school of 500, 600 people, and while the officer has no threat to safety, they are the outsiders. So it's incumbent upon them, whether they're in uniform, out of uniform, to develop those relationships so that when they are presented with a challenge within the school, it's not the first time they're meeting the student, because that works against all levels of engagement. My primary response is to be a resource to the officers and also the schools in how to deal with timely issues. For us, our SRO program had a lot of success, but we weren't able to mimic it throughout the entire region of Durham because it would have taken a lot of officers to make that happen, and it just wasn't cost effective to do something like that. So what we've tried to do is enhance that relationship piece with the officers and the schools. And we have to make sure that we have the right people in place. I would be lying to say that all police officers are created equal. They're not. Some officers have a better mindset and better relationship building, development, and opportunity to go into the schools, interject into the schools, get involved in the schools, engage in the students than others. And so we always make sure that we have the best officers that have that soft skill of trying to blend with the students and develop those relationships so you can reduce those triggers that the other panelists were speaking of.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to address another question to you. Expectations of police services continually expand beyond crime prevention and law enforcement. Police officers are one of the first responders to mental health calls, drug crisis, suicides, disturbances, and other community, other community well-being, and any kind of safety issues, that kind of thing, which may not be criminal. Given the current climate around mental health and Black racism, and what kind of training or what kind of protocol is the Durham Regional Police Service Board planning to implement? That's if you know. I'm not sure what's on the books.
So
and what will training look like? Will there be any kind of we're just kind of wondering if there's going to be any kind of escalation training. Is there any kind of training that's happening, and what what will it look like?
We already offer additional mental health de-escalation training for our officers. They already have that. I would be 100% honest with you. What I feel we need is additional mental health response members. We have two mental health response officers that are teamed up with mental health response nurses, but there's only 2 in Durham region. That's not 24/7 coverage, and that needs to be enhanced. I also think that there needs to be an enhancement of, I'll call it other services, other service providers with respect to mental health. The police cannot do it alone. We do have a function. There's a safety function. Obviously, if somebody is acting out in a way that presents themselves to be a threat to their safety or somebody else's, that's one thing. But we can't do it alone. We need enhanced social services. We need enhancement from community partners. We need a 24/7 response from different social service outlets throughout Durham region and really even in Canada. If I were going to give anybody advice, I would think that the Premier should start with doing an assessment of needs assessment for mental health response, and then be able to allocate resources based on that needs assessment. But right now, a lot of it falls on the police, and it shouldn't fall on the police. But we can't yell out and say, hey, you guys need to step up. It needs to come from our provincial leadership in order to make that happen. I can't hear you, you're muted.
It's muted.
Vanessa, you're still muted.
Yeah, I can't hear her.
Why am I still muted? Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, there we go. Let me take my hands off this. Let me take my hands off. So Lorianne, I'm addressing this to you. I see that you're kind of like shaking your head like you're so in agreement. So just real quickly, give me your thoughts on what Sergeant Richards just commented on.
I mean, I essentially agree with what Sergeant Richards says. I mean, I've spoken about this before. The police have a role, and we've asked them to do a lot more than what they probably got into policing for, and so mental health, no one got into policing saying, I want to deal with de-escalating those with mental health crises, and yet we're asking them, and I've dealt with it myself in terms of dealing with clients where they are constantly, the only person that's dealing with them is the police, and it's unfair to kind of ask somebody without the amount of training that's required to be a mental health professional and then put that on police officers who have other training on top of their charter applications and things like that. They have to know, like, there's a lot day to day. And I know that, you know, Sergeant Richardson knows that I'm probably one that points, certainly does a checks and balances on the police officers in terms of their day-to-day interactions. But I'm always looking backwards. They're having to deal with the present. So I think that we really need to, I kind of echo Sergeant Richards' request, which is to have provincial leaderships, federal leaderships look into getting that 24 hours response, those emergency teams, but for mental health crises, so we're not losing people and the police are not kind of in a situation where they're defending themselves and people are losing, you know, important members of their family because of mental health issues.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to move a little bit into there's a question that I wanted to kind of address to let's stay with Lori-Ann. I'm going to see if I can just jump to the question itself. What do you feel the Commission, as well as each level of government's next step should be to address the blatant racial bias within the system of policing? And do you think that they're taking a look at age and gender, mental health, socioeconomic status, and, you know, all kinds of things bubbled into one of all of the cases, you know, when it comes to making any kind of recommendations? There was a thing that went out about the Ontario Human Rights Commission that provides race-based breakdown, the use of force by officers, and the report found that, you know, the Black people are represented in a lot more cases of, you know, with the SIU, the use of force cases that result in injuries and death and all this kind of stuff. So again, you know, what do you feel that the Commission, as well as each level of government, next step should be to address this?
I mean, I think that one thing you want to do is just recognize that implicit racism and biases are with everybody. But the problem and why it's an issue with the police is because they are the ones with the amount of force. So someone being racist in, you know, their everyday is not going to have the same effect as a police officer who's there to uphold the law and protect the citizens. So that's step number one. And so the one thing I would say is what I'd like to see is more kind of testing and so acknowledgement of the implicit biases that exist. So something that's not done is there's a lot of talking to people and training, but there's not a lot of self-actualization in terms of where those biases exist. And so once you do that, and certainly Harvard has that implicit bias test, and you can take that test and say, okay, this is where I fall. So now you have a recognition, and so you can say, okay, this is what my issue is. I can't ignore this issue. And I think it's very hard to say to police officers and anyone to put them on the defense and say, you're racist and everything you do is racist, because they're not going to change if they're too busy defending themselves against being accused of racism. So I think that's step number one. The other thing is consistent yearly training on this, just as they would have with anything else, because this is affecting their day-to-day and it is affecting the public's day-to-day. And the truth is, if you get rid of kind of some of these overrepresentation of Black people with the use of force and over policing, then the police are not going to have a PR problem that they do, and the good police officers can do their job in the way that they're meant to do. And so that's kind of the starting point. Is, I think, one, testing to get that recognition, and then also appropriate and directed training into how to deal with once you realize that you have implicit biases, once you realize you have some implicit racism, how to deal with that and overcome those implicit things that are subtle and maybe not as easily recognizable in your day-to-day as a police officer. Okay. And I include that, by the way, at all levels of the justice system, because it starts with police, right, which you see it in every other, whether it's judiciary, whether it's the crowns, whether it's even defense lawyers, but certainly from all those who have power, they should understand where their power, how it can be misused.
Thank you very much, Lorianne. So before I move on to another topic, and I think I'm going to try to see if I can just flip back and forth. It's a little difficult just so that I want to engage everybody. But I'm going to put this one over to you, Sergeant Keith. So as we already know, the Durham Police Chief Paul Martin recently announced his resignation earlier this month. The Toronto Police Chief Mark Saunders announced his resignation in June. Now both are stepping down when there are calls in Canada for reforms to policing and greater police accountability after high-profile cases of, you know, some police brutality had happened. Do you see the police chief stepping down as a turning point for the Black community and its relationship with policing? And do you foresee any improvements to policing once the police chiefs are replaced? And I think we're probably pulling that question on experience. 30 years you've been there, 30 years.
So one of the things, I think the timing of their departures, I don't believe in my heart of hearts that either is related to the current climate. They, like me, they're in the same Ontario Police College cohort in terms of there was a massive hiring bubble 35 years ago that's now having all of these officers now coming to the end of their career, myself included. And I just think it's, if nothing else, it's more coincidental. I don't know Mark Saunders personally, but he has dealt with a lot of controversy dealing with the largest police service in the country. I don't think that he would be one to shy away from this for Paul Martin. I think that as he's indicated before, it was always part of his plan. Is it untimely? Absolutely. But Paul Martin is not the only officer we have that's leaving right now that started in his police college cohort. So I don't think either one are shying away by stepping down. I'm going to leave in the next year as well. I'm not leaving because of it either. If anything, I might want to stay a little longer, maybe to try and usher in a new day for policing and its engagement with the Black community. But they're all personal decisions based on my home needs and the home environment, and none are related to any hard issues dealing with the community. Will this be a turning point? I think so, because the two chiefs that will take over from those two members are going to have a lot on their hands. They have to hit the ground running. They have to be aware of the challenges that are specific to the Black community. And there are nuances to the Black community that no other community experiences. And if they don't know it, then they gotta know it, because it's not going to change. We can't affect change if we don't have leaders that are sensitive to these topics and able to pivot in order to address the needs of the Black community.
Amen. Thank you very much for that answer. I want to pull this right back over to Rasulan Hoppe, because this is a pretty big question, and I think it needs to be addressed before we move forward. It's about de-streaming. So Black high school students are disproportionately streamed into lower academic streams, which we know severely jeopardizes their chances to pursue a university education. Would you take a moment to enlighten us on how streaming of subjects starting from grade 9 have affected Black students? So this is gonna be like a two-part question, but I want to get that all sorted out before we move forward.
Sure, no problem. So,
I think I'm gonna give you 3 minutes for this one.
3 minutes, okay. So I'll do my best to set the context. So what the audience and members have to understand is going to assume that people are not familiar. So when you enter into high school, you need to start to make choices in terms of the different pathway of you want to pursue. And the nature of the course that you take is now going to determine the pathway. The pathway can be one that is known as academic, which applies to courses in grade 9 and 10, which leads to possibly university courses, or maybe college level courses, depending. You have a choice if you choose the academic pathway, or you can take applied level courses in grade 9 and 10, which would lead to the applied level programming, which leads to college level programming upon graduation from high school. So that is what they refer to when they're talking about. There are other pathways as well, but the the thrust of the conversation is always around applied versus academic. For those of us who are older, you might remember being referred to as general, basic, and advanced. And so advanced being what would be the equivalent of academic, and applied being the equivalent of what now would be general. And your post-secondary destinations, again, determine what you have in terms of aspirations, depending on the type of job that you want to pursue. When you talk about de-streaming, what you're talking about is the fact that the choice that you need to make entering into grade 9 is to either choose courses that are going to lead you to the possibility of taking university level courses and therefore going to university, versus taking applied level courses and that will lead you into the college pathway. And what we have found is that disproportionately, Black students are either forced by virtue of not being aware, made sufficiently aware, and or their parents are not aware of the courses, and therefore they take applied level programming when in fact they want to pursue university pathways, but they do not have the prerequisites when the time comes, and now they'd be forced to stay in high school longer to now go back and get the prerequisite at the grade 9 or 10 level to lead to the university pathway when the time comes for those decisions in grade 11 and 12. So that's the pathway context. What de-streaming is referring to is the fact that when you enter into grade 9, all students would now be taking courses to which it's not about whether or not you're choosing to go to college and or university. You're just taking a particular course similar to what you would have done in elementary school, in which you were just taking a particular area or subject of study. You're now taking that same subject of study in high school in grade 9, but it's not being given a designation of either pathway of university or college or academic or applied. The power in this is that you now have greater options and greater opportunities because you're now able to enter into high school and you're now able to make an informed decision after arriving in the school and getting a sense of what the school and educational system is all about. It's deferring the process because you will still need to make a decision at some point later on, again, depending on how it's implemented and how it's structured, either in the grade 10 year or your grade 11 year, depending. But the fact of the matter remains that you are not forced to make that decision upon entering into high school right away. And so there speaks to a larger issue of who is now informing the students in terms of making those decisions, and what are the opportunities that they're now going to be provided as a result of not having to be streamed or taking that pathway at such a young age when they enter into school in grade 9. And so what we know is that, and the largest cohort that's already done this is in the TDSB, the Toronto District School Board, and we already know that the students have found success as a result of engaging in this process. So it's been tried, tested, and is found to be true, and it does work. The challenge that we're faced with right now is that the ministry has now said that this is what they want to pursue. They want to pursue de-streaming in grade 9. But there's so many variables that go into this decision that we're still unclear about, that we don't know what the actual implications of this decision are. Namely, which courses are deemed de-streamed. We know that the emphasis is being placed on mathematics, and they've come out and said that from the very get-go to say that they want math to be de-streamed. But the challenge is that we know in our current educational system, English is what we refer to as the gateway course, because all post-secondary courses, destinations, require grade 12 English as the predeterminant as to whether or not you're able to even graduate, as well as being able to say you're going to move on into a post-secondary course of study at any university. And so if the government does not bring that forward as saying that that is one of the courses, you still have a fundamental barrier in terms of what now is going to play itself out as far as the likelihood for success, whether or not that student takes an academic or takes an applied level course. So I think there's too many variables that remain unanswered for us to be able to say definitively whether or not the decisions made by the government are a good one, because of the fact that we know we have the evidence to say that this is the right thing to do, but are they going about it in the right way? It's still early days yet, but they want to implement it right away. And so there are many changes that need to happen. And sympathetically for my educator colleagues, you now need to shift how you teach. You now need to shift your pedagogy. You now need to shift what it is that you are asking and expecting of students in your assessment and your evaluation practices. And if they are to start this right away, they need time to develop their courses. They need time to be able to work collaboratively with each other. You need time to be able to build in those structures. So those are some of the challenges that we're seeing based on this announcement.
Okay, so I watch the panel as everybody, as one person is speaking, and I have to go to Allison. Allison, turn your mic on. Let me hear. And I know that Rasulan took a few more minutes longer, but let me hear what you have to say on this topic. Like, oh my God,
Yes.
you're like this.
Like, I'm chomping. Because the investment has to be there. Historically, the investment has been made to educate our parents, to educate our supporters, to understand how these decisions are made around streaming students into applied or in advanced, different streams. And so, from as someone who's in the education system, that transitions piece that happens in terms of how students are either, guided towards doing an ECE program, or, something that probably might not necessarily, they might be told, this isn't too hard, go ahead and do that. And you meet these students when they get to campus and they're like, but my passion is in, math, or my passion is in, I wanted to do mechanical engineering, but here's where I was guided. And so the investment has to be made so that we can educate the community and educate the parents and educate, the entire family, the entire support system, so that they understand how these decisions are being made. That is important. The investment has to be there so people can be educated.
Thank you very much, Allison. Thank you. I needed to get that out of you. I would like to switch this up. I'm going to go over to the health side now and the well-being and everything. I need to shake this off a little bit. So I'm going to get onto the health and well-being. So Sophia, you're next on my hit list. And I would like to address healthcare and some mental health issues. Anti-Black racism can cause frequent stress on the body and trigger stress coping behaviors that often lead to sometimes fatal, and I don't like to use the word disease. I like the word dis-ease of the body. So research indicates that the Black identity exists at the intersection of racism, classism, and health inequity. And as such, the mental health needs of the Black community, it often goes unmet. So economic insecurity and experiences with criminal justice systems further, it just frustrates their mental health issues. After saying all of that, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges within the field of mental health at the moment that needs immediate attention to improve that situation and fill any kind of existing gaps?
Hey, so thank you. Yes, so I'm fine. So the first thing I would say is we need to start with education. So I'm going to look first at members of the Black community and our awareness and understanding around mental health issues and being able to recognize it, because oftentimes we do not. So there's so much that members of the community have lived with that has with anti-Black racism that has just been normalized. You basically learn that this is what you do to get along, and you do. And there's a whole idea of, a strong people. So there's much of that where we just keep going through and dealing with. As far as the system is concerned, there are a number of things that would need to happen. One of the first pieces around that is just the capacity to respond to the needs of members of the Black community in a culturally, racially appropriate manner. Right now, that is lacking. It's lacking from many of those in the field who are there as service providers. And there's also a lack of enough Black people in the field. So you'll hear many people who will tell you about their experiences when they do enter into the system, that it actually is very unpleasant, that people do not understand, and that they are feeling humiliated or further degraded. So we have to look at the system as it is right now and increase the capacity and the learning around understanding the issues as they are in the Black community. For one thing, we don't look at trauma as something that is going to be emotional and mental. So unless someone gets beaten up physically, we tend to think, oh, there's no trauma. The reality is living with anti-Black racism every single day with the microaggressions, that is a trauma. That is a mental health issue. And so it needs to be addressed as such. The other piece is also the number of people from our community that are entering into the mental health system via the criminal justice system. So we find out about it, gets on our radar when they're now in trouble with the law. So we're now dealing with both of those things. And so you can understand the stress that now goes with that as well. So we need to be able to address that systemic part of it for how people are getting into the system, the understanding and the awareness of the issues as they are within the Black community, and for those who are also providing the service. And another big piece of this with the capacity is also research. There is not enough research being done on the issue of mental health as it's impacting the Black community. And because of how research is often set up, you find that people can choose what they're interested in. And if we're underrepresented in the number of us who are in those fields, it means that we're not necessarily getting the kind of attention being brought to the issue with the research that we need in order to understand what this issue looks like and what the remedy needs to be in order for us to get to a place of wellness.
Thank you for that. So I'm staying with you for just a moment. Another question that I have here is there's an increase in awareness about the physiological and the psychological impact of stress on people of color and their high association with other chronic diseases, i.e., a lot of people of color, high blood pressure, diabetes, heart disease, that kind of thing. Now we have COVID-19 can now be added to that group, and the psychological effect of, anti-Black racism that further compounds all of this situation. So for change to happen, and in order to hold policymakers accountable, what do you see as the biggest challenges that we as Black people need to overcome?
So stress is
We need
definitely
to take better care of ourselves.
Yeah. So that always is primary, right? Self-care is primary, but I'm going to speak a bit to the accountability piece. I think first of all, we need access. We need access to the decision makers that are there for them to be able to hear what the issues are and to be able to hold them accountable for the policies and practices and laws that are going to be put in place so that we are having our needs represented. And much of that, oftentimes, it starts with simple things like, are we at the table? I actually had a political leader in Whitby who mentioned that he has never heard of, Whitby, that's being called Whiteby, anyone having anti-Black issues, no stories of this. He actually said that although we had the recent example of a young man, going through the system, having lost his eye from being beaten. When I asked about the representation at the table, the reality is people aren't there. So as far as accountability is concerned, we need to be able to have access, first of all, to the system and those decision makers. And if that means looking at how we get people at those tables, whether it means getting people from a broad cross-section of socioeconomic status, your gender, sexuality, the whole bit, then if we need to pay them for the time that they will be missing work to be there, then that definitely needs to happen. So there's that systemic piece of it where we need to say we have to be at the table to speak for ourselves. The other part that I can't stress enough is indeed the self-care. And it's oftentimes very difficult because one of the things that people tell you is, I don't have the time. They're stressed, they are stretched to the limit. So I have to take care of everyone else. When exactly do I find the time to take care of me? And so there has to be something that is done as far as programs are concerned, and just awareness for the simpler things that can be done to take care of us. So whether that's going to be mindfulness training, whether it's meditation, whether it's saying no to people and carving a space for ourselves, because oftentimes we do not. We say yes to so much. It's about being comfortable with saying, no, I am not going to do that, and making it a habit, putting it in, if it's even for 5 minutes, to say, I am carving some time for me, and make it a habit. This is what it will look like, whether it's first thing in the morning, last thing at night, 5 minutes in between, that we're going to take care to make sure we are getting what we need, and that we're modeling that for our young people. Because if our kids don't see us taking care of ourselves, even if it's that we're taking care of them, what they're learning is that it's okay to put others first before putting ourselves. So it goes both ways, where we need the individual piece, taking care of ourselves, but we also need to hold the system accountable to make sure we're getting access to resources and support that we need in order to be well.
Well, you know what? I was going to actually pose another question to you, but you literally segued it into it without me even asking, and that had to do with relationships in parenting. And you know, I have a daughter who's a helicopter mom, and you know, we all know that's monitoring and fair. And I keep going like, stop hovering over me, God, go away, right? So so you basically kind of address that as well, because parents, I find that, you know, we have this issue with them. Not only just they also encounter race-related stress, but then, you know, you have a great impact of quality of how they parent as well. Because especially if you have a boy child and she's a helicopter mom over my grandson, but she's not a helicopter mom over my granddaughter, right? So it's very different parenting between the two kids. So, but you kind of addressed that as well. So I just kind of wanted to get that out to you, that you actually answered two questions without knowing it.
Yeah, if I could just say quickly, Vanessa, in regard to that part, that one of the tools that's very, very effective is really journaling. So practicing recording your feelings and what's happening, and that can do two things. If we're in the habit of doing some self-reflecting and documenting what our day looks like, it's therapeutic in and of itself. It's helping us to understand what our triggers are and what we can do. But what it also does, especially looking at the whole family and our kids, it provides the paperwork, the track record for the isms that we're facing in society. So if we're documenting in my day at 12 o'clock today, this is what happened, and here's the impact it had on men. If the kids are doing the same thing for what's happening in school or what happened when they're on the road with the police officer, the journaling actually becomes like our video tape that we have, because it serves as documentation that we can then later use to hold individuals and systems accountable while also giving us the therapy that we need in order to get something out. So it's something that I highly recommend that we make the time to start doing and teaching our young people to do the same.
So Dr. Marissa, I'm going to flip right over to you now, and we talk about some you know, kind of what's kind of going on a little bit in the mental in the health field as well. So we have recent published reports show that Blacks, as well as other racialized doctors, frontline healthcare workers, and trainees experience overt racism by colleagues and patients. Are you aware of any anti-oppression and anti-racism training that currently exists within the healthcare organizations in Canada? And is anything being done to rectify that?
So I think every Black person in Canada has multiple stories about their experience, you know, within the scope or the sphere of where they work. And it's no different in medicine. There is overt racism occasionally, but the microaggressions are constant. And I think that's throughout your training, and even as a staff physician, I think we enjoy a relative amount of privilege because of education. And even in that setting, you will still get comments from people, both from patients, from staff. There are assumptions made about you before they even know your credentials. And there's a so-called Black tax, I would say, where you have to far exceed your peers, non-racialized peers, in order to be recognized and ascend to levels of leadership, which is really important in terms of having a seat at the table and having a voice. So all through levels of training, you sort of suppress some of the comments that you might want to make to address some of these issues, because medicine is very hierarchical and there can be consequences to raising issues. And so, but the positive is that things are getting better, because as more people get to have even a relatively pushback seat at the table, you start to have more of a voice and try to address these issues systemically, both in education and then in terms of representation. So there is a change coming. I was just sitting in a hospital administration meeting where the entire topic of the meeting, of the Zoom meeting last week, was anti-Black racism. And I've been in practice 10 years. No one has ever asked me to come to a meeting to discuss it. So I think by having panels like this, by keeping the pressure on, that's where the conversation gets started. Sorry, Vanessa, I think you're muted. You're muted.
That's why I don't do it, you see, because I keep talking and I keep forgetting I did that. So I want to jump over to you, Alison, for just a quick second, and I'm going to come back to you, Dr. Marissa. A 2019 study of about 3,100 Canadians found that just as many Black, Indigenous peoples of color experience racial discrimination in the workplace, and as they do in the street. And much of the discrimination in the workplace is in the form of microaggressions in which Dr. Marissa just touched on. What does the fight against microaggressions in the workplace look like for Black employees who feel their job security and advancement opportunities could be threatened as a result?
I just want to say thank you for the opportunity. I didn't get to say that when I was in my, trying to like chomp it.
You guys are more than welcome.
Thank you for the opportunity.
I love all of you. Look at that virtual group hug.
For the opportunity to be here. And I am of the belief that they're not even microaggressions. These are the actual acts of aggressions against us being in Black bodies, because it is the ongoing systematic gaslighting, making you second guess yourself, the feelings of not being a fit, the feelings of, not being able to pull your chair towards the table, or the space not being made at the table for you. So it is that ongoing, whether it be micro assaults, micro insults, whatever that look like. When we collectively pull it together, it is aggression. So it is, the questions about, where are you from? Where are you really from? It's the questions about our hair. It's the questions about, what we eat. It is, having people, scrunch their brows together because you have an accent and you say something, and your non-Black person who repeats that, all of a sudden it's their idea, it's the thing that you said. So it is all of those pieces that, really if you internalize it, it impacts our health, it impacts our physical health, and it impacts our mental health, because this is what we walk into. These are the spaces that we walk into every day. So how do we build community? How do we use, the positional powers that, we are able to, to advance? And how do we bring people with us as we build? This is the piece. This is the time, as Dr. Marissa said, the conversation is happening across every table. How do we jump on that momentum? And how do we name, these things that have been happening where we've been scared to name them in the past? So this is the motivation, this is the energy that we need to jump on right now, right? The time is now. And so, how are we building employment resource groups within our communities? How are we using our positional power to challenge, some of the policies that reinforce these acts of aggression against us?
Great. You guys have some mind-blowing, amazing answers. I love all of you. So back, I'm over to Dr. Marissa again. Racial inequities in health in the United States have been well documented and indicate that implicit bias on the part of healthcare practitioners affects Black patients. We see it every day. But there is little to non-existent research in Canada that explores the impact that race has on and encounters between physicians and Black patients. This is all due to the non-existence of the collection of race-based health-related data. How do you think we can accurately and effectively identify the cause of health inequities for Black Canadians and hear the voices of both healthcare providers and Black healthcare consumers without such data? Like, if we don't have the data, how's it working?
I think that's probably the most important comment. So in terms of our healthcare systems, what we care about are outcomes, and that's data driven. And if you don't have the data, then you don't know what's happening. What I will say is our healthcare system is complicit in anti-Black racism, full stop, because our healthcare system is built on colonial constructs that perpetuate racism. So it starts from there. When you look at healthcare outcomes, people want to talk about hospital visits and clinic visits and the interaction between a practitioner and a patient. That's important too. But the most important determinants of healthcare outcomes are the social determinants of health. And that's food, water, shelter, education, and psychological support. So if you're not collecting that data before you even talk about what's happening as an individual encounters the healthcare system, then you have a problem. So the decision for how data is collected requires a seat at the table. So that's policymakers, that's physicians, that's hospital administrators, that's government officials, that's every stakeholder that needs to be present. So if there is no representation from the community, from all of those stakeholders, then the decision to collect data from Black people, from people of color, Indigenous people, that is the root. So policy has to be extended to be able to collect that data. Then you can distill it down to all of the disease processes.
So that just another segue, and you probably have more to it, but I want to kind of get to this question, where the Ontario government gave approval to collect race-based data, COVID-19 data on a voluntary basis. CUP Ontario called on the provincial government to release race-based COVID-19 data. Why do you think there's such a pushback to collect the data? And, you know, do you think they should make that mandatory?
I think they should make it mandatory. I think all of this data should be mandatory. And the pushback can be for different reasons. I think one of the biggest reasons is they just don't understand why. There's a lack of perception of why this is important, and maybe a relative apathy about why this is important. It's not a priority. And so that's where voting and community leadership becomes important, because people consider that a priority when the public considers it a priority, and there's pressure to do so. And it's sad to say, but that's really it. And again, this goes back to the healthcare system being complicit in this process. So nothing is going to change unless there's some disruption going on. And the status quo is to not delegate resources for these sorts of things. Because remember, data collection, all of these things require resources. So there's always going to be back unless you can make an argument for why this is important. And of course, everybody on this sort of channel knows that this is important, but we need to have our voices heard.
And for all of everyone on this panel, as well as listening on this platform, remember that Dr. Joseph Smith sits on the board of Operation Black Vote Canada. So, you know, send him a chat message in the chat, how to get in touch with him to get your voices heard. Send him a message. Dr. Joseph Smith sits on that board of Operation Black Vote. Okay, I just wanted to reiterate that and get that out there. Now, I'm going to move over quickly to Andrea. I don't want us to run out of time, and we haven't gotten to Andrea. Oh, my goodness. Now, let's get to business, Andrea. It has been reported that 70% of Black-owned businesses are not eligible for Canadian Emergency Business Account funding due to payroll threshold requirements. One may point to this statistic as evidence that Black businesses have systemic barriers preventing them from scaling their business in a meaningful way. What do you see as some of the systemic barriers that continue to plague and challenge Black business owners and entrepreneurs? And what tools are at their disposal that you feel will allow them to scale their business and become national players? Big guns.
National players, that's right. We are poised to be national players. Thank you for the question, and thank you for inviting me. I just want to comment on a lot of the great conversation I've heard before. I think Allison mentioned the term microaggression. I'm fully in line with what she said. I don't believe in that term. There's nothing micro about it. It's aggression. So I work with people and we do workshops on unconscious bias, anti-Black racism. And I think it's important just everyone become comfortable with the language. It's aggression, it's anti-Black racism, it's discrimination. So I think everyone needs to get really comfortable with that. And then to echo what the doctor had said, it's data and maybe it's apathy. In our case, we don't have enough data. I believe that Black entrepreneurs have a significant impact on the Canadian economy. I know that. Unfortunately, we don't measure that. So we don't know the impact that Black entrepreneurs have on the BC economy, have on the PEI economy, have across the entire country. So I think if we had more data, if the government took the time to look into this information, we would be more successful. Anti-Black racism is pervasive across the board, including when it comes to entrepreneurship and Black-owned businesses. We talked about streaming earlier. If you don't take the right courses, study the right courses, that can affect, obviously, your future. If you want to be an architect, there are certain courses you want to take. You want to be a mechanical engineer and then eventually start your own business, it's the education system that gets you into that area. We have heard countless examples of people who have had trouble in financial institutions. Because of a history of anti-Black racism, access to capital is huge in our community. That is one of the biggest issues our members face and other Black-owned businesses face, not having enough money to build capacity to open multiple locations or even to start that one location. Unfortunately, due to COVID-19.
We're gonna segue, 1 second, but then we want to segue into that Black credit union that's slated to open.
Yes.
So do you want to give us a bit of information in now the rest of your answer on that one?
Absolutely. So the Canadian Black Chamber of Commerce, in partnership with the Jamaican Canadian Association and the Lions Men African Circle, the three of us have come together and are creating a Pan-African credit union. We call it PACU for short. So the plan is to launch next summer. And why are we doing this? Yes, we have financial institutions. Yes, we also have credit unions, but we don't have one that is uniquely designed for the Black community. You know, the whole premise of for us, by us. So the plan, if you look in the States, there are Black-owned, there are Black banks and there are Black credit unions all across the US. We don't have that here, and it's time that we have that here. We're not looking for a handout. We're looking for an opportunity. We always want a seat at the table, but I've heard the expression, if we don't get a seat at the table, we make our own table.
Exactly, exactly. So some of the opportunities, so we're crunching for time now, so I want to get this out there so that people who are on board listening will, I would love for them to get in touch with you. I'm not advocating anybody's anything, but you know, I would like them to know just a quick list of some of the services, the products, and opportunities that you guys are slating to be offered to small business owners and just to people in general during the creation of the Black Credit Union.
Sure. So we're still in the formulation stages now. We've done our survey, we're writing our business plan, and next is our application to FSRA. So I can't give you more details specifically on that, but just know that credit unions are for the community. They're nonprofit organizations, and they're designed to support the community. As far as the Canadian Black Chamber of Commerce, a national organization, we have a chapter in Durham region. We are just like any other Chamber of Commerce or Board of Trade. Our goal is to advocate for you, the business owner. If you have an issue in your community, you have an issue with anything related to the way you're operating your business, you need help, you need to get in touch with a government official, reach out to us at the Canadian Black Chamber of Commerce. Our job is to go to bat for you. We write the emails, we knock on the doors, we pick up the phone, we make those calls. It's important to get our voice heard. We believe that we want the government officials to know that we're out there and that we have an impact. So advocacy is very, very important to us. And when it comes to the government, we also believe in procurement and having Black-owned businesses a part of the supply chain. We go to school together, we live amongst each other, we are each other's consumers. We also want to be suppliers and vendors to other businesses and the government in Canada.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I want to jump over to Allison because I really wanted to ask this question and I bypassed it. So Allison, diversity focuses on the makeup sorry, let me backtrack. Diversity focuses on the makeup of the workforce, while inclusion is a measure of the culture that allows diversity to thrive. Many workplaces in Ontario measure their diversity strictly by the number of employees who do not identify as Caucasian. This does not account for systemic racism and inequality specifically, the exclusion of Black people from benefiting from opportunities that are afforded to others. Question: do you have any insights on how non-BIPOC in positions of leadership and authority in Ontario workplaces can shift how they view diversity in the workplace and ensure the perspectives of their Black identifying employees are considered in all inclusion initiatives. Your insights.
Yes. I'm not sure if everybody is aware of or heard of the Black North Initiative. So there are steps, there are initiatives that are out there where CEOs and presidents of organizations are being encouraged to sign a pledge that puts a definitive percentage on how they will engage and advance and recruit for Black folks in the community. So that's one thing I want to say off the bat. In terms of how by POC folks can get involved and in essence be allies, because everybody has been asking since all of this has happened, what can I do, right? What can I do? How can I educate myself? How can I go about doing that? Well, this is where we need them to amplify their voices, right? This is where we need, that they in positions of leadership look at the systems that have been created and really explore how we dismantle some of these systems that create barriers and creates exclusionary practices for Black folks. So how are we recruiting? How are we advancing? How are we looking at the protocols that are in place? How are we amplifying, Black folks' voices at work? How are we, creating space so that there could be employment resource groups being developed so folks can connect to other people who look like them? We know representation matters. How do they advance Black folks who are qualified, in the workplace so that, they share information on advancement tracks, on learning, on training opportunities, right? How are they amplifying their voices so that they're very clear about anti-Black racism, around the training they provide for the organization as a whole, around when they make those statements, that there are concrete actions that goes with these statements. How are they using their positional power to advance Black folks? These things are important. How are they advocating with the senior leadership to say, this is not equitable? When we wrote this policy 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, it was written by a white man. It is not necessarily equitable. It was written through their lens. And so how are we creating spaces that those Black folks in senior positions can actually advocate and pull up other Black folks so that they feel empowered to do that? Because you don't always feel empowered to do that. It is not always safe for you to do that. So this is what we need, non-Black, Indigenous, people of color. If you want to be allies, you have to be authentic allies. You cannot be performative ally. I don't want to see your screen blackout on your social media for 2 days or for a week. That is not enough. That doesn't do anything. You have to get in there and do the work. Do the uncomfortable work. You might lose friends. You might shake off friends in the process. But if you're going to say you want to do anti-Black racist work and you want to be an ally, be an authentic ally and do the work.
I have two questions left. I have one for Sophia and I have one for Lori-Ann. I am running over time, but I want to give you guys 2 minutes to answer this question as quickly as possible before I got to pass it over back to, then we're going to come back and we're going to have a final question. So Sophia, the latest federal budget earmarked approximately $19 million over 5 years for mental wellness in Black communities. Given all the issues we've highlighted, what are some ways that you would recommend that the money be spent in order to improve the wellness, let's say the health and wellness of Black people in Canada? We're not even going, just how do you think that we should, how should that money be broken up, spent? Let's go shopping.
You want me to
You're
answer?
muted. You're muted.
Me?
Sorry.
I heard.
No,
Okay.
Sophia.
Yes. So I think that a significant amount of the money should actually be spent on creating programs for Black people to be able to access the mental health care that they need, with Black practitioners who are able to understand and respond well to their needs. I think that is imperative, that the lessons are there, and that we have some of these actually going through our school system, because the school is actually in place and touching on many of the young people that we need, and also our parents. So as far as distributing the information is concerned, I think that would be a fantastic place for us to be able to have that. So actually practical programs that are going to be looking at preventative, but as well as what do I do when? How do I recognize the signs of, and how do I get the help that I need in order to make that better? I also think that money should be spent on a campaign, a major campaign, very much the same way we had MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, for example. I do think that we need to identify this as the mental health issue that it is, and that we go across the board to make sure we're destigmatizing, but also shaming those who are going to be engaging in that behavior. So as we talked about the aggressions, if we make it a social thing where just like smoking, has been something where we don't want to do that anymore, or wear your seatbelt, that we actually have this campaign, because when we have the public on board, then pressures come to bear, politicians respond to, oh, aren't you voting for me? And then we start to get action, some of which is what we're seeing right now. What's different about this moment? That it's not just Black people that are speaking out, but we have diverse people saying, okay, enough is enough. So if some of that money could go towards actually doing that social campaign to start to shift attitudes that we have towards anti-Black racism, recognizing it as something that's a trauma, and recognizing it as something that, it is not cool to do it. So for that reason, if no other, I am going to stop, and then making sure we have the capacity within our community in order to respond to the issues as they've been identified. Now we know we have it. Now where do I go to get the help in a way that's actually going to matter?
Okay, thank you so much, Sophia. Lorianne, I am closing this with you before I pass it over, because I'm running so behind time. So a question that I really would like you to address: racial disparity in the criminal justice system exists when the proportion of a racial or ethnic group within the control of the system is greater than the proportion of such groups in the general population. The causes of such disparity can include differing levels of criminal activity, law enforcement, emphasis on particular communities, legislative process, and or decision-making by criminal justice practitioners who exercise board discretion in the justice process at one or more stages in the system. That's a loaded gun. Did you get the question?
Okay, kind of.
Yes?
So are you asking me?
So then the question, can you explain the sentencing and parole? So the question is, can you explain the sentencing and parole project and how this will help with racial disparity?
Okay, so the sentencing and parole project are something that's kind of akin to what's been happening with Indigenous people in the justice system. So Indigenous people in the justice system, there's a recognition of the colonization and the effects of their systematic discrimination that's been present in Canada, but there hasn't been the same recognition for Black accused. And obviously, similarly to Indigenous, not all Black persons are the same when they come before the criminal justice system. But one thing that is very similar is that Black accused people are overrepresented in the criminal justice system, just the same as Indigenous people. And this is something that is specific to Black and Indigenous people. And so this is we've focused quite a bit on Indigenous. We have not had the focus on Black accused. And it's really, I would say, in the last few years, and when I say few years, I mean the last year or two, maybe 3, where there's been a recognition that Black accused persons are different and they need to have that kind of same consideration. It is not what some would say is a credit for being Black and getting a discount on sentencing. It's a recognition of the unfairness, the systems, the fact that this learned helplessness that Black accused experience. So where they are more likely to plead guilty, they're the ones that were getting the offenses for marijuana possession in the past more so than their white counterparts who may have been given a warning. And so they rack up criminal records much quicker in some cases. And so then when they come for a more serious or even just at their 3rd or 4th time, they get a sentence that is maybe disproportionate to a white accused who didn't essentially get over-policed or have the same experience with the justice system. So this now is what we call a cultural assessment report. So it's going into discussing colonization with the Black and anti-Black racism within the Black community, as well as a more in-depth sentencing report. There is pre-sentencing reports for anyone if they wish, but Indigenous people have what they call as a GLADU report, which is a look into, again, the systematic discrimination against Indigenous people, plus the personal circumstances of that accused person. And the same would be for the Black accused. And that would be helpful not only at sentencing, but also in parole, because the same material at sentencing is used for parole. So it's just a matter of trying to level the playing field in terms of Black offenders. I think you're still on mute. Yep, you're still on mute. There you go.
I am still on mute. Oh my God. Now I'm mute. So I said I'm running so far behind time on this because I've got to switch it over to Angela. So right now I would like our panelists just to switch your mic off, turn your video off. I'm going to pass this over to Angela, and then we'll come back with the final question, okay?
Angela?
Yes. Good evening, everyone. I'm Angela Todd Anderson, the president of the Oshawa and Whitby chapter of the Congress of Black Women of Canada. And I just want to thank everyone so far for taking part in this great panel discussion. We'll be moving on now and welcoming our politicians that are here with us tonight. So we have, I'm hoping I'll just call them by name, John Henry, the regional chair and CEO of Durham Region. We should have Sean Collier, the mayor of Ajax, Mark Holland, the Liberal MP for Ajax, Maurice Brenner, the City Councillor of Ward 1 in Pickering, and Jennifer O'Connell, the Liberal MP for Pickering and Uxbridge, and Colin Carey, who's the MP for Oshawa, Jennifer French, MPP for Oshawa, and Don Mitchell, the mayor of Whitby, Elizabeth Roy, regional councillor for Whitby, and Matt Gaskell, the CAO of Whitby, and Ron Hooper, City Council of Ward 2 of Clarington. And I'll just like to move on. There are a couple questions that we have from the audience that I would like to put forward. The first question that I have here, and I am not sure if Mark Holland is here with us.
No, I had to join a call. He asked me just on behalf, because we're from the same party, same government, so I'm happy to kind of share any of that information.
Okay, we have a question here. It says, they would like to know the thoughts on the SBCC program, which is the Supporting Black Canadian Communities program, and to hear their views on the Black community and mental health, and whether they acknowledge the stigma that ends to exist around mental health for the Black community. So we'd like to know what's his views is on that.
Oh, this is for Mark?
Yes.
Okay, so I think in general, in terms of the federal government, it was mentioned in the last panel, some of the monies specifically that we earmarked for mental health for Black Canadians. And I actually really appreciate some of the ideas, because part of this is going to be crucial. Obviously, healthcare is provincial jurisdiction. And so we're going to have to find ways of how to get this funding and how to get these supports directly to communities in an area of jurisdiction that isn't traditionally ours. And some of the ways that I think we're trying to do that is to build partnerships, people on the ground, people that know where the needs are. In terms of because there was kind of two parts there in terms of mental health, but also the economic piece. And that's kind of an area that I think we're spending a lot of time on right now. COVID has highlighted the pressures for not only Canadians, but Black-owned businesses are being some of the hardest hit, as was discussed in the earlier panel as well. And so these are discussions we're having in terms of how do we ensure these supports, whether it's mental health supports or health supports in general, or economic supports in general. And so I think the idea of representation at the table is some of the most crucial and important. And when we look at program development, if we don't have public servants, if we don't have representation in all levels of government, we're missing a huge opportunity for ideas on how to distribute, how to implement some of these policies in the communities that need it most. So in terms of those specific areas, I think this is something that all governments are being challenged with, of how it's one thing to put up the money, which is something we've already contributed to, but how does it have the impacts and the outcomes that we want? And so that's where these conversations are important. And that's where this continued commitment, but having the voices at the table, having the partnerships, and ensuring that we have a diverse public service and levels of government that actually know how to implement these programs in ways that have those desired outcomes. So I can speak more on the economic piece, but I don't want to go too far down off topic in the interest of time. So I'm happy to do that.
Thank you for your answer. Before I go any further, I just want to acknowledge Deidre Newman, who has joined in also. She's a Whitby counselor. Also, maybe if, just to get another view, I know if Jennifer O'Connell is on the line, I ask this because it's a federal program, the SBCC program. So if I would love to hear from Jennifer O'Connell.
So that's me.
Sorry, I was looking, sorry. Okay, the next question that I have would go, I'm not sure if John Henry is on the line. No. No. What about Sean Collier? Is he on the line? The mayor of Ajax? Okay. Okay, I'm going to put this question out there then for, I don't know, I think I've heard Jennifer French before. I'm not sure if she's still on the line.
I'm right here. I'm waving at you.
Sorry, I did see. Hi, MPP Jennifer. So I have this question. How do you plan? I know with the issue of anti-racism and the inequality that's been arisen lately, not that it's anything new, but it has come up. How do you plan to address this issue of inequality that's amongst us?
Thank you. It's a big question, and it's I think it's the answer is fairly basic, and that is sincerely and not alone. I think that there are two pieces to that, and I'm sure that my elected colleagues recognize that we as individuals have the responsibility to our communities to do the work, but we're also part of obviously my lane is provincial, and of course sitting across from a government, my role is to push for change, but also to be a part of it, right? It's one thing to criticize, but we are offering solutions. There's, I don't know if I'll have another chance to address it, but there's a commitment to action that the provincial NDP has put out, for example, on ending police violence. And it's an outline of a plan to invest and take action. And we've made that public, and it's a working document, because that's a big piece of this is the ongoing collaborative work, because it's not just about putting an idea on the table and hoping that the conversation stops. It's about making change that's meaningful, and that has to be alongside communities. So that's kind of a big picture answer. In terms of many of the specifics, can I just say I've really appreciated and valued this time with this panel. I have been on part of a number of conversations and have always learned, but it's not just about listening and learning. I mean, there's been years and years of that. Enough, like we've got all of the reports. There's not more work that needs to be, there's work that needs to be done now based on the work that has come before. And a number of the things that came up in terms of the justice system, specifics around health, the economy, education, there are a number of very specific things that have to happen, and they have to happen. We can't just keep talking about it and putting in, the race-based data, but using it, and then that accountability step. So the action without accountability, to my mind, is more talk. Because you can put a plan in place, but if you don't loop back and ensure that it's working, if you don't ensure that you're funding programs that are working, that has to not just be a piece of it, that has to underpin everything, is that we are accountable.
Okay, thank you. I see now that we have Mayor Henry on the line. So
I think it's Chair Henry.
Chair Henry, sorry, because someone typed in and I'm looking on the list. So we have your story because I'm looking at the chat and someone put it in. So Regional Chair John Henry, I would like to pose that same question to you. How do you plan to address the issue of inequality from a public sector, from where you're sitting?
Well, the first thing is we have to admit that we have a problem and a challenge. And if you don't admit there's a problem, there's no way to go forward and fix it. One of the things that's really important for us is tomorrow at Regional Council, you will find that there's a motion to hire additional mental health workers, mental health nurses, to go out into the community and work with Lakeridge Health and Durham Regional Police, but they will be regional employees. That we were hoping to, by tomorrow, getting through that meeting, getting that passed, that we will have 24/7, 365 days of the week where we have a mental health person available to go out and respond to our community. It's about meetings like tonight. We're able to listen and learn about the challenges going on in the community, and through that we can establish dialogue, and then we can go forward and fix it. I'm here at the municipal level of government, but we have problems. We have problems because the federal government creates the laws, the province funds the municipalities, and we deliver the services. And there's problems at all three levels of government. And we really need to sit down and have that conversation on how do we fix it. And we don't have times to have studies and meetings and all kinds of things. We need to put working groups together to come up with solid answers. So I know that's a long answer, but the change will start here tomorrow in Durham Region when that motion is passed and we're able to start to work towards 24/7, 365 mental health coverage in this great region.
Thank you. Thank you. And maybe this next question I could pose to you, as you mentioned also that, there have been a lot of meetings happening around, and I think one of the questions that comes from a lot of our meetings is that going forward, what recommendations for training, would be put in place. I know in particular, like the police force, what particular training is going to be put in place to combat anti-racism?
So I think for us is the key to that is exactly what's going to happen on August 6th at 6:30 p.m. when we host a anti-Black racism town hall event where we have key leaders from our community there as panelists that are helping us to do this. But also part of that, Chief Paul Martin's going to be there, and he's going to listen to the community. And when he can hear what your voices are saying, then we know we have to change. But we need our leaders at the table that will help us that change. If you look at the mayor of Ottawa today and his comments he made about, or not the mayor, I'm sorry, the police chief in Ottawa, and his comments that were made today about how he is creating change, that's a great way to start. So I think it's already happening. We're going to learn more on the August 6th, and I'm looking forward to that evening. And what we need to hear is we need to hear that truth. We need to understand. It'll be a very difficult meeting, but people, we need to hear so that we know what we need to do to change. And I admit we have some challenges, and it's time to fix those.
Thank you. We're a bit running behind time. So at this time, I just want to thank the politicians that are online. Thank you for your responses. And I will turn this back over to Vanessa at this time.
Thank you. I will now ask that the panelists please put their videos and their mics back on. I'm going to address the final question that I have to Rasulan, Poppy, Andrea Barrett, Sophia Bishop, and Lorianne Thomas. So it's one thing for us to recognize that systemic anti-Black racism exists and explore how it has and continues to negatively impact the Black community. But rather than talk the talk, how can we walk the walk? So can you provide us with any concrete steps that you feel should be taken now to start that process to totally dismantle the anti-Black racist structures and systems, specifically in relation to our economy? And I mean the economy of Black people, because we need to get moving with our Black Wall Street. And the health and well-being of our Black people, so that it is not perpetuated years from now into future generations. So what do you think that can be some of the concrete steps that should be taken now to start to dismantle that process? As I am behind on time, I would like to keep your answers brief, to the point, and as quickly as you possibly can. So I would like to start with Lorianne.
Okay. So, I mean, I'll be brief. You need to have more Black people in all areas of the justice system, at the judiciary, on the committees that select the judiciary, in the Crown's office, in those who are selecting those for Crowns, those encouraging Black persons to go to law school. And in addition, there has to be training into anti-Black racism and implicit bias and unconscious bias, so that people understand that there are people with trauma and experiences that they're coming before the justice system.
Thank you, Lorianne. Andrea, where's Andrea? Andrea, are you there? So in place of Andrea, I will have Allison. Could you answer the question as you are here?
We need to be diligent in our request for dismantling anti-Black racism. You know, we need to approach it from all of the different areas that we have represented here, from a mental wellness perspective. You know, the work that we put in as a community in how we guide our young folks into education, how we create opportunities when we have advanced. How do we build as we move on? How do we pull people up as we build? You know, how are we engaging our criminal justice system, our police forces, so that, you know, we can create safe spaces for our young folks. So we need to collectively, we really need, it has to be a collective approach, and we cannot let up. You know, this is another opportunity where 5 years or 10 years from now, I don't want to be having the same conversation. So exactly. There's a momentum. There's a momentum. We're here, we're having this conversation. And so let's turn that into some actions. Let's hold some people accountable with our buying power, with our voting power, with all the power collectively that we have. And let's make some action come out from that.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Rasulan?
I would say within the specific realm of education, what you need to take a look at are the policies, because you need to be able to change the curriculum. We all are here within a colonial structure. And so you need to change what is being taught, so that way you can change what it is and how it is that people are thinking. So I think that we need to make structural changes to our curriculum to ensure that as anti-racist, specifically, you disrupt anti-Black racism that is prevalent within many areas and many aspects of it, as well as ensuring that everybody is aware of and is trained in a manner to be able to recognize their own personal bias, and then being able to counter that as they are now engaged in the process of teaching and educating children, to allow Black children to be able to flourish and have equitable outcomes on par with what we know as Black excellence and what they're able to attain.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I'm going to, okay, I still have some time. Sophia, real quick.
Yes, I would say that knowledge is power. So we really do need to start with empowering, in particular, our young people. Let them know how systems work. Let them know that they do have power and they can start holding people accountable. And I would say the same would go with parents, especially when it comes to the area of mental health, that they start looking at what we mentioned earlier, the piece around taking care of ourselves first and foremost, so we will have the strength we need to do the fight, and then to hold the people in our systems accountable, reaching out to those who are online with us today and say, what exactly are you doing on this particular agenda? And as Allison mentioned, we do not let up on that. We're going to be here even when this is no longer on the front page, by putting a system in place that says, here's how we as a community are going to do this. So I would say the empowerment piece with our young people, getting the knowledge that we need as parents so we can provide the support that they need in order to take their rightful place there. And as far as being at the policy tables are concerned, we can ask each and every one of the politicians that are here today to say, what do your policy tables look like? What informs the decisions that you're making? And we would like to be put there, because that, a lot of times they say we don't have the money, we don't have this. Well, there are people out here who are capable and can be at those tables, and that can be done tomorrow. So we can start there in making sure we're making the right decisions and our voices are being heard.
Thank you. And Sergeant Keith, I want to end it with you.
Great.
Again, our concrete steps to move forward, and you have literally 1 minute.
No problem. I think one of the first things we have to do is be able to demonstrate what anti-Black racism looks like. Whether it be research, or whether it be statistical data. From my agency, we spend a lot of time on StatsCan, and we're able to provide that data, essentially saying that we need to prove to people that it actually exists. From a policing standpoint, we do a lot of implicit bias training, anti-racial profile training, inclusive language, privilege. We do a lot of it. I would put our training up against what any police services received, or any organization really has received in Ontario. But there's a lot more to do. And I feel like the start of it is the implicit bias training. I believe that it was Lorianne that first spoke about the implicit bias part, and we need a lot of it, because you don't know what you don't know. And while we have a lot of people have great big hearts in the Durham Regional Police, it doesn't mean that they don't make fundamental mistakes when engaging racialized members of the community.
Awesome. And I think, Dr. Joseph, I want to get your last word as well. I don't want to leave you out, but and I know Dr. Marissa is here. 1 minute and 1 minute for Dr. Marissa, and then we're going to close this puppy up.
Oh, thank you for giving me the last word. I think the practical thing I would say is we need to identify some practical interventions that we can do. So a list of diseases that people need to be educated on, and there's many of them. Sickle cell crises, going to the emergency. They are not drug seekers. They're in specific pain. So when you identify diseases and interventions, you can actually go to the frontline workers and educate them on that particular group and what their needs are. I think there are probably about 100 of them. You could make a list and implement that in 3 to 6 months. I think it's those small steps, but important steps, that will help to overall help the system.
Perfect. Dr. Smith?
Creating an anti-racist culture is done and made at the systems level. And that means corporate individuals, governmental individuals, and educational institutions will have to create the mechanisms necessary to incubate better thoughts and better habits going forward into the future.
Thank you very much, everybody. Is Andrea back? I was hoping she was, but no, she's not. Okay, well, you know what? I'm going to do my closing, and I got to pass it over to Magdalene. So we've had a very important discussion about systemic anti-Black racism issues that exist for Black Canadians. And we have talked about ideas and recommendations for combating these roots of anti-Black racism. I'm sure we have learned a lot from tonight's discussion, and I really hope that our government officials have listened carefully, have taken notes, and that they can in turn bring back to their tables of discussion and implement changes to just rid our systems of the anti-Black racism once and for all. It's no longer working. And I want to say a big thank you to all of our panelists, all of our politicians, all of our community patrons that came on this call today, and for joining us for as we discuss this. And you know, just I hope we can do this again, and hope that some other changes have taken place moving forward. So from me, I want to say good night. I love you guys. Virtual hugs. I absolutely just adored this conversation. I loved it. Remember Dr. Joseph Smith, Operation Black Vote.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
Over to you, Magdalene.
Hi. Okay. I'd like to thank the audience and government officials for your presence today and for taking part in this very difficult but very courageous conversation. The panelists have pointed out to the policies, structures, systems that perpetuate anti-Black racism in various sectors, and they've presented some solutions that our public officials can take away to implement. This is a turning point in the fight for justice and equality. Our community is ready to roll up its sleeves and do the heavy lifting. The next step is where the real work begins. I want to thank the library staff, Jessica, Becky, Allison, Sarah, Cindy, Mallory, and CEO Jackie Flowers. And a very special thank you to Juliet Young, our education chair, who was very instrumental in planning this event. Okay, she's been very instrumental and she's been at the table from day one. This ends the webinar. Again, we thank you all for taking part out of your busy schedule to join us. What I'd like to do
There's Juliet.
Juliet's right here.
Wait, Juliet.
Okay. This ends the webinar, and I'd like to ask the moderators and also the panelists to wait around for a while. And I'd like to say goodbye to the audience. Thank you very much for joining us.
And a huge thank you to Magdalene, because she's not thanking herself. So on behalf of the libraries that you have allowed us to take part in this, huge, huge, huge thank you to you, because the Congress of Black Women Canada, the Ajax Pickering and the Oshawa Whitby chapters have been huge partners of all of the libraries in Durham region, and really providing a lot of education for us to learn how to be better allies, to just listen and learn how to act with what is happening in the world right now. So huge thank you to everyone from the libraries. But she disappeared, but the biggest shout out to Magdalene for working with everything. So big thank you.
Yes, I agree. Well said.